Hello everyone! So today I was thinking, because this whole series is turning into a bit of a circus, I have decided that the word we are going to be translating into Romanian today is circus. So circus is translated into Romanian as circ. Circ. Circus. Well done guys, you just said circus. Yes, because this is very fitting for today's video, and I also feel like I need to address the fact that yes, I do have a cold sore, which is a huge cold sore, and the reason is because I am constantly feeling thirsty. This for the last week, I don't know what happened, but I am constantly feeling thirsty, and because I'm always thirsty, I usually have these cold sores happening. Yeah, there's no way I can cover it with makeup. Yeah, I'm going to say that I can't cover a cold sore with makeup. I tried. I used concealer, I used foundation. I should have used a bruise kit, but I don't have one. But anyway, yes, it's covered. I have been trying to cover it, but obviously it's not working, is it? Anyway, okay, so let's start. Before we do get started, just a quick disclaimer. I don't mean any disrespect to anyone I talk about in the video. This is for educational and entertainment purposes only. All the information I'm giving you in the video is found in the public domain, and I'm just using the information I find and compile it into a video. I will also be giving my opinions and views on this. Thank you so much. And also, there was something else that I wanted to say. What was it that I wanted to say? Oh yes, because we are doing part 4. So this is part 4 of Jeffrey Epstein series. This will be the last part of the series. I need to say that all the videos are in a playlist. The playlist link is in the description of this video down below. And also, like I mentioned in part 3 of the video, if you feel like it's easier for you to follow along, I can compile all 4 parts into a video. It will be a very long video, but I can compile them into a video, and you can catch up on, on all of the parts in one video, where you can pause and get back to it whenever you feel like doing it, or I can just leave them in the playlist as they are right now. Yes, and also of course I need to mention that if you haven't watched the previous parts of the series, this last part won't make much sense to you, so I highly recommend you watch those before you start watching this one. Okay, enough of rambling. So this is the last part, guys, the last part, and finally we can move on. And just recapping very quick here, I'm not giving you an overview, just a quick recap. We know that Ghislaine Maxwell was a recruiter, right? To say the least, she was a recruiter. Oh, and also she was the lady of the house, yeah? Yep. She recruited girls from disadvantaged backgrounds, homeless, from drug, alcohol, violent filled home lives, poverty and such. Girls who were very vulnerable. They came from families, others were in foster care in the system, others were living in trailer parks. And apart from all these collective issues, what do you think was the thing that these girls had in common? Money, or lack of money, and lack of positive parental guidance or figure in their life. So, knowing the weaknesses and innocence, they were lured with the prospect of earning what they lacked: money. Training them to give massages, to build a career. Others were sold the prospect of being a model, have a successful career, and so on. These girls were being promised a life that they really lacked. They were promised better living conditions, a bright future ahead, no violence, only rainbows and unicorns, as I like to say it. They were never promised what they actually received: violence, aggression, assault, force, degradation, and imprisonment. And to make even more money, they turned recruiters themselves, because they were paid a bounty for it. The more you recruit, the more money you make. At the same time, you are being by Ghislaine, accused by Jeffrey, Ghislaine, and many more, and you are being held a captive. The parental figure soon turned into the worst monster. And the girls had no escape. Some of the girls would recruit other girls from school parties. They would be in front of a high school looking for other girls who seemed poor or coming from those backgrounds, and they were also promised money, a better life, a brighter future, and so on. And exactly this way, you all of a sudden had hundreds, if not thousands, of children being recruited from all over the world, from countries who did not so well, from countries where poverty was widespread, from countries where there was war, violence, and so on, and not only from those countries. And here you have Ghislaine Maxwell, a socialite with endless connections and a degree in modern history, and here you have Jeffrey Epstein, a financier with millions or billions even, who seems to know just about everyone everywhere. These two, they feel untouchable, don't they? The little black book is, as I like to call it, the business card holder. Everyone is either a client, a potential client, or a victim. What's funny is not really funny, but you know that in the UK, in modern history, you study the history of Britain, Europe, and the wider world from the 18th century to the present day. And as I just mentioned, Ghislaine studied, what did she study? Modern history. Yes, she studied modern history in the UK. And do you remember my very first video of this series? I spoke about the Harlots TV series and most importantly, the real life origins of a legendary book dating back to years 1757, 1795 Georgian London, the 18th century, which is extremely similar in content to Epstein's Little Black Book. Yeah. Well, get ready guys, because I think that the following will reveal even more than we want to. Let's travel back in time for the purpose of this video, right back to 1760s London. And this is where the Harlots series is born, or inspired for lack of a better word. Harlots is a British-American period drama series created by Alison Newman and Moira Buffini and inspired by the Covent Garden Ladies by British historian Hallie Rubenhorn. The series focuses on Margaret Wells, who runs a brothel in 18th century London and struggles to secure a better future for her daughters in an unpredictable environment. And here is the plot for the Harlots series. In 1760s London, women's opportunities for economic advancement are either through marriage or sex work. The city's brothels are run by canny and determined businesswomen, such as Margaret Wells and Lydia Quigley. But there is a new morality on the rise. Religious evangelists demand the closure of brothels, and police are happy to launch brutal raids. The show revolves around Margaret Wells' determination to improve her life and the lives of those in her family by moving her brothel to Greek Street in Soho to serve a wealthier clientele in Georgian society. Her move to Greek Street puts her into direct conflict with a rival Madame, Lydia Quigley, for whom she had previously worked. Lydia Quigley operates an elite brothel in Golden Square that serves rich, influential people. Now, Lydia Quigley is the one who lures girls from poor backgrounds without parents or basically starving with the prospect of well-paid jobs as a cook or a house cleaner to the rich. Obviously, the girls agree, right? But as soon as Lydia has them in her grasp, she locks them up in a room and she sends clients in. At the same time, the girls become fearful of Lydia and they remain to work there out of necessity and fear. They are barely paid anything because Lydia keeps most of the money and they are forced to look good, pleasing to the elite clientele. They have to dress a certain way, wear makeup a certain way, and look clean and attractive. But Lydia wants leverage, right? So she starts keeping count of the elite clientele. She writes down their names, who they've seen, and how often they go there, and she uses this as blackmail whenever she is looking for a favor. And she's always cashing in on those favors. Sounds familiar? This is what the series Harlots is about in short. I do recommend watching it though, because oh my god, it paints a completely different light into an 18th century life and struggle and what people of that time had to do to just get by. I have to say that nowadays we live in a world and time where we are extremely privileged. So the series Harlots was inspired by the Covent Garden Ladies by British historian Hallie Rubenhold. But before him, here is the original little black book. And the name for it is Harris's List of Covent Garden Ladies. The earliest printed editions of Harris's List of Covent Garden Ladies appeared after Christmas 1756. Published by H. Ranger, the annual was advertised on the front pages of newspapers and sold in Covent Garden and at booksellers' stalls. Each edition comprises of an attractive pocketbook. They usually contained no more than 150 pages of thin paper on which are printed the details of between 120 and 190 prostitutes then working in Covent Garden. Priced in 1788 at 2 shillings and 6 pence, equivalent to about £16.77 in 2020, Harris's List was affordable for the middle classes but expensive for a working class man. Each edition of Harris's List opens with a front piece showing a mildly erotic image opposite the title page, which from the 1760s to 1780s is followed by a lengthy commentary on prostitution. This introduction argues that the prostitute is of benefit to the public, able to relieve man's natural inclination towards violence. It describes the customer as a patron supportive of a good cause. Quote, "Be your purse strings never closed, nor let the name of prostitute deter you from your pious resolve." End of quote. The entries detail each woman's age, her physical appearance, including the size of her breasts, her sensual specialities, and sometimes even a description of her intimate areas. Additional information such as how long she had been active as a prostitute or if she sang, danced or conversed well is also included. Addresses and prices which range from 5 shillings to £5 are also being provided. The types of prostitute the list presents vary from low-born errant drabs to prominent courtesans like Kitty Fisher and Fanny Murray. The charms of Mrs. Dodd, who lived at number 6 Hind Court in Fleet Street, were listed in 1788 as quote, reared on 2 pillars of monumental alabaster. Continuing, the symmetry of its parts, its borders enriched with wavering tendrils, its ruby portals and the tufted grove that crowns the summit of the mount, all join to invite the guest to enter. End of quote. In the same edition, another description precedes the end part of Miss Davenport's entry, which concludes, quote, "Her teeth are remarkably fine. She is tall and so well proportioned. When you examine her whole naked figure, which she will permit you to do, if you perform the Cytherean rites like an able priest, that she might be taken for a 4th Grace, or a breeding animated Venus de Medicis. She has a keeper, a Mr. Hannah, both kind and liberal, notwithstanding which she has no objection to 2 supernumerary guineas." End of quote. Miss Clycamp of number 2 York Street near Middlesex Hospital is described as, quote, "one of the finest fattest figures as fully finished for fun and frolic as fertile fancy ever formed. Fortunate for the true lovers of fat, should fate throw them into the possession of such full-grown beauties. End of quote. More characteristic of Harris's list, though, is the 1764 entry for Miss Wilmot, which tells of a love encounter with King George III's brother, the Duke of York. Quote, he gazed on her a while with eyes of transport and fondness, and gave her a world of kisses, at the close of which, in a pretended struggle, she contrived matters so artfully that the bedclothes having fallen off, her naked beauties lay exposed at full length. The snowy orbs of her breast, by their frequent rising and failing, beat Cupid's alarm drum to storm instantly, in case an immediate surrender should be refused. The coral-lipped mouth of love seemed with kind movements to invite, nay, to provoke an attack, while her sighs and eyes half closed denoted that no farther resistance was intended. What followed may be better imagined than described. End of quote. But if we may credit Miss Wilmot's account, she never experienced a more extensive protrusion in any amorous conflict either before or since. The Duke of York was only one of many famous men to have been mentioned in the lists. Others included James Boswell, Ernest Augustus, King of Hanover, the clergyman William Dodd, Charles James Fox, George IV, William Hickey, Francis Needham, first Earl of Kilmorey, Robert Walpole, amongst many others. The women's route into the sex trade, as described by the list, is usually attributed to youthful innocence, with tales of young girls leaving their homes for the promises of men, only to be abandoned once in London. Some entries even mention rape, simply described as women being seduced against their will. Lenora Norton was apparently seduced in such way, her entry explaining her experience, which occurred while she was still a child. The old urban legend of young girls being apprehended from the crowd by devious or madams is illustrated by William Hogarth's A Harlot's Progress. But although in reality such stories were not unheard of, women entered into prostitution for a variety of reasons. Rural immigrants in search of work could sometimes find themselves at the mercy of unscrupulous employers, or manipulated into the sex trade by deceit. Some entries in Harris's list illustrate how some women managed to live themselves out of deprivation. Becky Lefevre, once a streetwalker, used her business sense to gain considerable wealth, as did Miss Marshall and Miss Becky Child, who are each mentioned in several editions. Many of these women had rich keepers, and some married wealthy aristocrats. Harriet Powell married Kenneth Mackenzie, 1st Earl of Seaforth, and Elizabeth Armistead married Charles James Fox. The famous prostitute Betsy Cox's 1773 listing describes how, when she was refused entry to a gathering of elite society at the newly opened Pantheon, she was helped by, among others, the Duke of Fife, who drew his sword to enforce her entry. Some lists also contain defenses of prostitution. Earlier editions claimed that the trade guarded against the seduction of young women, provided an outlet for frustrated married men, and kept other young men from the scene that nature rejects, or so. However, no such views were expressed with regards to lesbianism, which in England, unlike sexual acts between men, has never been illegal. Miss Wilson of Cavendish Square believed that, quote, a female bedfellow can give more real joys than ever she experienced with the male part of sex, end of quote. And Anne and Eleanor Redshaw provided a discreet service in Tavistock Street, catering for, quote, ladies in the highest keeping, and other women who preferred to keep their activities private. More generally, most entries are flattering, although some are less than complimentary. The 1773 listing for Miss Barry denounces her as almost rotten and her breath cadaverous. In the 1773 edition, Miss Dean exhibited great indifference while entertaining her client, busying herself by cracking nuts while he was acting his joys. Others are scorned for wearing too much makeup, and some for being lazy bedfellows. A popular view that prostitutes were immoral, hot-blooded, and hungry for sex was incompatible with the knowledge that most worked for money, and the list therefore criticized women whose demands for payment appeared a little too greedy. The identity of the list's authors is really uncertain. Some editions may have been written by Samuel Derrick, a Grub Street hack born in 1724 in Dublin who moved to London to become an actor. With little success in London, he turned instead to writing, publishing works including The Dramatic Censor, being remarks upon the conduct, characters, and catastrophe of our most celebrated plays in 1752, A Voyage to the Moon in 1753, and The Battle of Laura 1762. Derrick, who lived with the actress Jane Lessingham, was an acquaintance of Samuel Johnson and James Boswell. Boswell viewed him as but a poor writer, while Johnson admitted that if Derrick's letters had been written by one of a more established name, they would have been thought very pretty letters. Hallie Rubenholz's 2005 book, The Covent Garden Ladies, sets out her interpretation of the story behind Harris's list. She claims that John Harrison, otherwise known as Jack Harris, a savvy businessman and pimp who worked at the Shakespeare's Head Tavern in Covent Garden, was the list's originator. Born perhaps around 1720-1730, Harris apparently had expert knowledge of prostitutes working in Covent Garden and beyond, as well as access to rented rooms and premises for his clients' use. He kept a record of the women he pimped and the properties that he had access to, possibly in the form of a small ledger or notebook. Derrick, having previously authored the memoirs of the Shakespeare's Head and possibly also its companion piece, The Memoirs of the Bedford Coffee House, was probably familiar with the Shakespeare's Head. The former book details, quote, Jack, a waiter who presides over the venereal pleasures of this dome, end of quote, and its author likely studied Harris as he went about his business. Which of the two men first thought to produce Harris's list is unknown, but probably for a one-off payment, Harris allowed his name to be attached to it. With his detailed knowledge of Covent Garden and with help from various associates, Derrick was able to write the first edition of Harris's list in 1757. As an aspiring author and social climber, he preferred not to associate himself publicly with such questionable material, and his name as such doesn't appear on any editions. Printed and published by the fake name Hage Ranger, responsible for works such as Love Feasts or the different methods of courtship in every country throughout the known world, the proceeds from the hugely successful first edition enabled Derrick to repay his debts, freeing himself from a sponging house, which is essentially a lock-up house for people who weren't able to pay their debts. His fortunes changed for the better when he became Master of Ceremonies at Bath and Tunbridge Wells in 1763. His death on 28th of March 1769 followed a prolonged illness, but despite a significant income, he died penniless. He left no official will, but on his deathbed, he passed on the 1769 edition of Harris's list to Charlotte Hayes, his former friend and mistress and a madame in her own right. Charlotte died in 1813. As the self-declared General of all England, Harris accumulated a considerable fortune, but his indiscretion proved to be his undoing. Prompted by reformers in April 1758, the authorities began to hunt down and close houses of ill fame. Covent Garden was not spared, and the Shakespeare's Head Tavern was raided. Harris was caught, locked up in the local compter, which was really a prison, and then he was imprisoned in Newgate. He was released in 1761 and had some interest in publishing from 1765 to 1766, printing Edward Thompson's The Courtesan and later The Fruit Shop and Kitty's Atlantis. But he seems to have given this up late in 1766. He became the owner of the Rose Tavern, not far from the Shakespeare's Head, but by the 1780s he had an employee running it. The Rose was demolished in around 1790, and for a few years Harris ran another tavern, the Bedford Head, with his son and daughter-in-law. He died sometime in 1792. The Shakespeare's Head closed for business in 1804, and 4 years later the empty premises were badly damaged in the same fire that consumed the Covent Garden Theatre. From the 1770s, Harris's list changes focus significantly, moving away from the women of Covent Garden to their stories. Its language becomes more refined, lacking the euphemisms which helped make it so popular. Material from earlier edition is recycled and very little attention is paid to accuracy. The responsibility for some of these changes can be attributed to John and James Roach and John Aitken, who from the late 1780s were the list's publishers. Harris's list was published for a city rife with prostitution. London's bawdy houses had, by the 1770s, disappeared from the poorer areas outside the city wall, and in the West End were found in 4 areas: St. Margaret's in Westminster, St. Anne's in Soho, and St. James's, and most especially with more than 2/3 of London's disorderly houses around Covent Garden and the Strand. The area was noted for its great numbers of female votaries to Venus of all ranks and conditions, while another author distinguished Covent Garden as the chief scene of action for promiscuous amours. Patrick Colcan estimated in 1806 that of Greater London's approximately 1 million citizens, perhaps 50,000 women across all walks of life were engaged in some type of prostitution. Whether any of these women could confirm their addresses for publication in Harris's list is something that author Sophie Carter doubts. She views the annual as primarily a work of erotica, calling it nothing so much as a shopping list, textually arrayed for the delectation of the male consumer. Continuing, they, the women, await his intervention to institute an exchange, embodying the traditional male role in pornography. Elizabeth Dellinger includes a similar sentiment in her essay, The Garment and the Man. Quote, this varied display of women to satisfy the great itch is a fundamental aspect of the sphere to which Harris's list offered British men a carte d'entrée. End of quote. Rubenhold writes that the variability in the descriptions of prostitutes over the years the list was published defy all attempts to categorize it as either exclusively upmarket or simply middle of the road. She suggests that the annual's purpose was to conduct the desirous to the embrace of a prostitute, and that its prose was designed for solitary sexual enjoyment. Attitudes towards prostitution hardened at the end of the 18th century, with many viewing prostitutes as indecent and immoral, and it was in this atmosphere that Harris's list met its demise. Books such as The Wandering Whore and Edmund Curl's Venus in the Cloister in 1728 are often mentioned alongside Harris's as examples of erotic writings. Along with the anonymously written 15 Plagues of a Maidenhead 1707, Garfield and Curl's works were involved in cases that helped from the 18th century legal concept of obscene libel, which was a marked change from the previous emphasis on controlling sedition, blasphemy, and heresy, traditionally the ecclesiastical court's province. No laws existed to forbid the publication of pornography. Therefore, when Curl was arrested and imprisoned in 1725, the first such prosecution in nearly 20 years, he was under threat of a libel charge. He was released a few months later, only to be locked up again for publishing other materials deemed offensive by the authorities. Curl's experience with the censors was uncommon though, and prosecutions based on obscene publications remained a rarity. Although their court actions spelled the end for Heresy's list, despite the best efforts of the Proclamation Society, later the Society for the Suppression of Vice, the publication of pornography continued rapidly. More pornographic material was published during the Victorian era than at any time previously. And my Victorian dress should probably know that better. So guys, this is basically the real origins of the Little Black Book and its contents. I mean, for one, honestly, I found so many similarities between Heresy's list of Covent Garden Ladies and Epstein's Little Black Book. But is it an inspiration for Epstein's Black Book or just an unfortunate coincidence? I will give you my thoughts and my views on this, and you guys can let me know in the comment section down below what conclusion you reached. So, Epstein had a Little Black Book which contained high society individuals' contact details alongside girls' details that were essentially used by him, Ghislaine, and their associates. These victims were lured into it with a false pretense, much like a lot of the young ladies in the original Black Book. The madams of these houses would bring girls in with lies and then force them to sell themselves. Ghislaine was the lady of the house, according to various ex-employees who worked for Jeffrey. So my conclusion is that Ghislaine would have been the madame, right? She lured girls in with prospects of making big money legitimately, but in the end they were. She lured girls from disadvantaged backgrounds, rough lives, the system, and poverty, much like a lot of the young ladies in Heresy's book. People who could afford Heresy's book were middle class and high society individuals, usually men, well-connected and well-known people such as King George III's brother, Prince Edward, Duke of York. Jeffrey and Ghislaine only dealt with the elite, the rich, the powerful, the famous. Virginia Giuffre accused Prince Andrew, Duke of York, of SA. Ghislaine Maxwell also graduated in modern history, which, like I said, teaches British history from the start of the 18th century, and Heresy's Little Black Book was written in the 18th century. Constitution was a big, if not a huge part in British history, and these are just to name a few. Now, the biggest difference between Heresy's Little Black Book and Ghislaine and Jeffrey, in my opinion, is that the original book talks about prostitutes, right? Ghislaine and Jeffrey, I believe, had much more going on than just providing girls for the elite. I am looking at the bigger picture here, and it leads me to believe that it could be something related to Jeffrey's obsession with science, his views on eugenics, transhumanism, cryonics, and seeding the world with his DNA. He even wanted to get his penis frozen, for God's sake. He had a ranch in Mexico where he wanted to do just that, impregnate women with his sperm. And do we really know that he didn't? From all of their victims, only a few came forward. Who really knows exactly how many there are all over the world? And also, not to mention that they had pornographic obsessions, Ghislaine and Jeffrey, and also the sexual preferences, and also Ghislaine calling the girls nubiles, which points right at pornographic websites, is not very far-fetched in my honest opinion. Oh, and also I have been watching The Alienist, the series The Alienist, and I'm not sure if it's entirely true or not. I tried to actually research this. I'm not sure if it's true or not, but as it seems from The Alienist, it turns out that boys, for example, when they were available for prostitution, in front of their house, in front of the house, or the brothel, in front of the brothel, they would hang on the rail in front of the house boots, a pair of boots, to kind of show clients that these boys and girls are available for prostitution in that building. And it's very interesting to note, because I am reading quite a few different things on this hanging of the boots thing. I read that at times gangs would kind of mark their territory by hanging boots or trainers on top of the street if you have trees or you have like an electricity line. I'm not entirely sure about that, but it's very interesting, because where I live right now, in the town I am in, on one of the streets, as my husband was driving by quite a long time ago, I noticed a pair of trainers hanging from a tree branch, and they were hanging down the middle of the street. They were at a height, obviously it wouldn't disturb the cars passing by, but still they were trainers hanging there in the middle of the street. So I don't know, was this a sign? The hanging of the boots, was this a sign that there were prostitutes available in that particular building, and it was a sign for the clients that they could go in? Or is it a sign for gangs to kind of mark their territory? I honestly have no idea. So anyway guys, having reached the end of the video, please do let me know what do you all think about this Harris's list of the Covent Garden Ladies and Jeffrey Epstein's little black book, and all the coincidences with Ghislaine Maxwell and what they did in comparison to what Harris's list was all about. Thank you guys so much for watching today's video. Please stay safe and take care, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!